Hello everybody, SlimKirby here, and I'm going on a long journey of trying to complete every single Game Boy Advance game in North America. This is the story of the highs, the lows, and all the silly stuff in between for the Game Boy Advance completion experience. This is GB Ace. Game number 13, Paws and Claws Pet Resort.
The hell is this?
Yes, Nelson, a very good question indeed. What the hell is this? Seriously. Paws and Claws Pet Resort is a pet care simulator developed by Independent Arts and published by THQ. As far as the release date is concerned, I got a lot of conflicting information about this one. The wiki page that has all the release dates for the GBA library has this listed as 2006, but any reviews I read said this came out later in 2007 or even 2008, after the other two Paws and Claws games were already released. And yes, there are more games for this series. Please help me, Lord. Because of this, I'm honestly just not gonna really worry about the chronological order for these games, as I had already started playing this anyway by the time this was pointed out to me. And clearly, the internet doesn't want to bother with correct or accurate information for this game. Not that I blame the internet for that either. Safe to say, this game was, by no surprise whatsoever, not a good game. Hear that, Blades of Thunder? You may actually be better than something now. So here's the deal. We play the role of a nice young lady who is taking care of animals at a pet care facility, handed down to her by a relative of hers. In this game, we're given an objective and we have to fulfill the conditions of the scenario, which will generally be pretty basic stuff like properly take good care of a certain number of animals, but can extend to other aspects of the game as well. There are only 6 scenarios in this game, so surely this shouldn't take too long to get through. However, fellow GBA challenger Bread Ghost apparently spent 25 hours on this game. Although there is most certainly a reason for that, and I'll explain why in the next section, as it's kind of a version-specific quirk of this title. Also, default difficulty was set to easy, so easy mode it is. I'll try to look into what changes on higher difficulties and talk about that later though, so no worries there. Now, about that version-specific quirk I was alluding to earlier. Apparently, the North American version of this game is completely bugged. And now, I'm not talking about the ROM for this game, I'm talking about the game in general. Like, even the physical cartridge has this same quirk. Apparently this game just can't be completed for some reason, and the scenarios just keep on going with no static end, as far as my understanding of this bug is concerned. As a result, I actually decided to do the European PAL version of this game instead for this challenge, which funnily enough can actually be completed. Now, I know that for this challenge the idea is to complete all the North American versions of these games, but since I can't complete it, I don't really have much of an option here, as it's either stop now because the game can't be completed, or go on forever because it never ends. So honestly, I think the PAL version is a fair compromise. Plus, I can still play in English because it's one of the language options, so there shouldn't be any issues with not being able to read text. Anyway, we start the first scenario, and this one is all about taking care of rabbits and turtles. We apparently need to take really good care of these animals, as their care rating needs to be at a certain threshold before their owners come back to retrieve them. Now, when I started playing this, I very quickly figured out that each animal's health stat was supposedly the care rating I was aiming for, and that was directly tied to their hunger and hygiene stats, as not exactly an average value, but the better those stats are, the higher the health will be. And therefore, I needed that value to be over the required amount before the owners came back to retrieve the animals. And in this scenario, I needed to be over the threshold for 5 turtles and rabbits during their individual stays. I wasn't sure if that meant for each species or collectively though, but whatever the requirement, once you fulfill the goal, the scenario will end after that day in particular, so just keep going until the game tells you to stop. Taking care of these animals is actually kind of easy. You just buy some food, potentially buy some toys and other luxury items, go to one of the animal pens to feed them to lower their hunger, clean their cages to improve their hygiene, potentially play with them because why not? And then you go to the other animal pen and do it all over again. And you pretty much just repeat the process throughout each day. When a day ends, you get a generalized report on how you're doing so far, and if you have met the conditions, you pass the scenario and the gameplay ends there. If not, it continues into the next day and goes until you have completed a day with the objective being done. And that's really all you have to do for this one. Now, you've probably noticed that there are some other stats for these animals that are mysteriously absent, and these stats are movement, company, and luxury. At the time, I didn't know why these stats were missing, but upon later reflection, I wondered if it had to do with the fact that I put this on the easy difficulty. And sure enough, the other stats do get added whenever you do up the ante, adding movement to medium and higher and luxury and company for just the difficult mode. I imagine this just makes the game harder, or rather slightly more tedious, as you have more things to pay attention to that ultimately contribute to the health rating. But aside from that, all the objectives seem like they're the same for each scenario, and I honestly don't believe that will change or affect anything for that ending either, so I kinda just went on with easy mode for this game completion. It probably makes the game a little less interesting, but come on, it's not exactly setting a high bar to begin with. Also, the game itself just doesn't look very good, and it seriously repeats the same song for the entire game. I seriously had to turn the music off and play other game music instead, just so I wouldn't go insane with the same old banjo tune over and over and over again. So yeah, I just kept repeating the process until I was done with the scenario. I also took note of what each individual animal liked and preferred as their snack and action of choice, although I honestly feel this information is more relevant on the higher difficulties, not easy mode. But I kept the info anyway, just to add some variety to what I was doing each day. Anyway, this first scenario actually took me a few in-game days to get right, even though it honestly felt like I was making progress. I think it just depends on how well you take care of the animals, as sometimes the text you get after an animal is taken home is much more expressive and positive than some of the other text, which is more generic. So you need to make it so their review really emphasizes that your care was really good. You can also do really badly too and get animal services to take away one of your visitors, and obviously that's not something you want to do because not only is bad pet care a terrible thing to do in the first place, but if you get a certain number of animals taken away, you'll fail the scenario. So let's hope that doesn't happen here. But yeah, eventually I finished the scenario and got the ability to move on to the next one. For the next scenario, in addition to taking care of rabbits and turtles, we can now take care of budgerigars? What the hell is a budgerigar? Oh, it's a type of bird. Well, I'm probably just going to call them birds from now on, just in the interest of simplicity. Anyway, while the general gameplay doesn't change much for this one, really only just adding one more animal type to the list, we do actually have a new scenario objective, and for this one, we need to go on a bit of a spending spree. Basically, for all 3 animal pens, we need to fully develop them to level 3 by spending our money to purchase the upgrades, while also buying all the luxury items for each pen as well. Basically, max out your resources for each pen, and then when the next day ends, you should pass the trial. Now, pet care is technically less important in this scenario, but keep in mind that you can still fail if your ratings drop too low for 3 animals, so don't intentionally bomb your progress just to complete this one. Besides, neglecting animal care is a terrible thing to do, and I would consider you a big meanie face if you did so. But yeah, repeat the same process as you did before, go through all the motions you did in scenario 1, earn your buck by taking in a bunch of animals, and then just buy as much as you can once you have a lot of moolah. You honestly start with a lot of money as it is, maybe even enough to fully upgrade 2 pens to start, but since you might need to buy some food for later on, I would not recommend letting your funds drip too low. Just give yourself a nice buffer amount, like 800 or so, fully purchase one animal's resources, and then don't buy the next animals until you earn back to 800 again. That's pretty much the strat I used anyway, and it seemed to work well enough. Also, don't forget the luxury items, since you not only need those two, but sometimes new ones will become available if you level up one of your pens. I actually had to do an additional day just because I didn't realize I got more items to buy once I bought the last upgrade, so keep that in mind. I got excited about the third scenario because this one added kitty cats to the mix, and for those who don't know, I love cats. Honestly, I love animals in general, but felines are probably my favorite type of animal, from house cats to even wild cats like lions and tigers as well. It's another reason why I like the Lion King so much, and why I kept doing that silly Nala joke during the Chain of Memories video, just for a little more context. Anyway, once again, this just adds another pen to the game, so now we have 4 animals to take care of. And the goal for this scenario is more akin to the first one, but this time, we just have to take really good care of 10 cats during the course of this run. Good enough to have a health score of 50 before each feline gets returned to their owner. But yeah, that's really about it. The game wasn't really getting any harder, just slightly more tedious, since I had to rotate through additional animals, while also paying special attention to one specific pen, as cats were the priority focal point this time. And to do that, I just made it a priority to finish each day taking care of the cats, and then trying to squeeze some extra points the next day, if it was a day they were supposed to be returned. And honestly, that strategy worked pretty well here, and I was on my way to completing Scenario 3. After beating this one, I was officially at the halfway point, and feeling pretty good about completing this game. Honestly, the only thing that was becoming a chore was quite literally trying to stay awake and engaged in this game, because my god, was this not only boring, repetitive, and tedious, but each day was a slog to get through. Each in-game day is roughly 14 hours, which is about 14 minutes of real time. And that's not even counting menuing in between that time either, so yeah, this was pretty brutal from an entertainment standpoint. However, little did I know, this was only going to get worse before it got better. For Scenario 4, in addition to the introduction of dogs to the equation, the objective this time is to once again focus on general pet care. However, the bar for success was much more strict. At least, the game said so anyway. In addition to having the health above 50, we also need the hunger and hygiene values to be below 25. So much less room for error. However, here is why this is much more brutal than it appears. We have to do this for 10 freaking days. That's right, 10 days straight, almost 3 hours of gameplay, just doing the same old process over and over again. My god, this was not a fun prospect for me. And you know what somehow made this even worse? Although you would think managing the stats wouldn't be that difficult and you'd just have to pay attention to them and fix them when they're low, well, here's something I haven't talked about yet. Sure, the hygiene is pretty easy to manage, just go to the animal pen and do a spotless clean, bam, they're back at 0, no issues. With hunger, this stat is a lot harder to manage. Animals will only eat when their hunger stat is around 60 to 65. And you have to give them special food in order for it to decrease down to 0. And apparently that's only for certain pets too. Doesn't even work for all of them. However, depending on the timing of when that value gets to that hungry state, they may never get hungry enough to eat before their owners pick them up. So you could be stuck with a hunger of around 40, 50, or even 60, and fail even though you were fully prepared to do the right thing. Heck, the animals could even eat too early, and that value could increase just above 25 before their pickup, leading to you failing the conditions anyway, once again being at the mercy of timing. You almost need to rig it so you feed them special food at a very specific time. That way, if their owners do come the next day, you are at least covered in any specific situation. But even that doesn't really work, because sometimes certain animals get hungrier faster than others, so it's just a clusterfudge of trying to get this timed properly. And yet, it still manages to find a way to get worse. If you somehow manage to not fulfill the condition, the game doesn't even tell you until the scenario is over. That's right, you could go an entire 3 hours, scrutinize every single detail of your pet care, get unlucky in one very isolated incident where, God forbid, a pet's hunger was 26 and not below 25, and only because it needed to eat just a tiny bit before it was scheduled to, and then, at the end of the 10 days, find out that it was all for naught and you have to redo the entire scenario, all 3 hours of it, all over again. Pardon my language here, but that is absolute bullshit. There was no reason for the requirements to be that strict, and remember what I said earlier, the messages you get from your customers are very generic, and it's not like the game keeps a running total for you either, at least for the conditions you're aiming for. So you could get a customer coming to get their pet before you have time to check their values, and ultimately have no way of knowing if you even succeeded for that animal or not. At least as far as I could tell anyway. The amount of crypticness for this game was nothing short of asinine, let me tell you. And it's not like there are any guides for this game online either, because really, who in their right mind would want to fully dissect this game to begin with? Let alone just play the game to begin with. The only information I had to go by was from the other GBA challengers who had already done this game for their own challenges, and some of them couldn't even complete the game because, as explained earlier, they were doing the US version. So yeah, this left me in an utter state of confusion and uncertainty of how to even progress here. I was already knee-deep into an attempt at this scenario, and after definitely botching the hunger stat of one of my animals and getting a very generic thank you message from my customer, I knew I had failed the conditions at that point, but still had some reservations on whether or not I should just give up then and there. Would the game really fail me for just one single mess-up? It's not like I took bad care of the animal, and the customer still at least thanked me for the animal's stay, and it's not like the game was letting me know that I was in danger of failing either. I seriously had no idea of what to do. Do I cut any potential losses now and just start fresh, trusting the words of the GBA challengers that my run was doomed, or do I take my chances just to finish this run out and potentially save myself from needing to redo the entire 3 hours over again, at the cost of just another hour or two to get to that point and at least get the confirmation? It was not an easy decision, that's for sure. Ultimately, I decided to go with my peers and start from scratch again, as much as it killed me. However, I went into this run with a more level head and some additional strats. For one, the game does have a save system with multiple files for save progress. I could essentially just make a save for each day and reload to an early one if I needed to fix or change anything, or if I was uncertain of a particular result. Reloading would waste time, but so would going 3 hours just to find out you lost, and that would be a greater time loss anyway. Second, I found out that you don't actually have to take in every single animal that comes in. There are some the game will force you to take, but for the most part you can limit the amount of chaos and work you need to endure for each scenario run, and that will be paramount in making sure you meet the needs of each pet you do take in. You'll miss out on some money by rejecting some customers, but you'll also need less resources as well, so keep that in mind. With this information in tow, I tried this scenario again. And this run went, well, it went fine. Ultimately, I did succeed, thank God, but boy did I take a big risk in going along with it. I ultimately came to the conclusion that as long as I got a positive response from my customers when they took their animal back, I should in theory be okay, as I was getting 2 specific messages at various levels of health from 50 plus to close to the max at 100. So that was what I ultimately strived for, getting either one of those 2 messages, even if the hunger value wasn't quite aligned where it needed to be, and then I would reload if I ever got a message that wasn't quite there. Usually if it was a message like, "Yo, thank you for your care," with no sort of positive emotion whatsoever. Thankfully, this line of thinking did work, which meant that at least the game had some leniency. But trust me, this is not a point in the game's favor. The fact I had to spend 3 hours on uncertainty did not feel good in the slightest bit. Seriously, why say the values need to be lower than 25 when they don't actually need to be? That just doesn't make any logical sense, and only added more stress to a run where I could only control so much of the game to begin with. Also, for those wondering what's going on in the corner there, to reduce boredom during this run, I started playing Wordle on the side while I was waiting around for things to happen. Trust me, I would have been falling asleep otherwise if I didn't have anything to keep my attention going. Scenario 5, of course, adds another animal to our list in the form of horses, and horses are actually the last animal you can take care of in this game. We still got one scenario after this though, so we're not quite at the finish line, but at least it's kind of in view. Also, this scenario seemed a little more reasonable as our goal is just to give back 10 horses that have been given the topmost care. I didn't like that the health requirements seem to be 75 now, but at least there wasn't a day limit this time, so our only fail condition is if we incur the wrath of Abska, which is at least pretty easy to avoid. But yeah, this was pretty brainless. All I did was accept horses, rejecting any other animals that came by because they didn't contribute to the requirement. And even though the health requirement was higher now, I still managed to pull it off at least. It helped that I did actually find a way to stagnate the hunger in certain circumstances by spamming snacks if they were just under whatever threshold they needed to be at. Although, you have to be careful since these snacks will cost money. You could also theoretically take in other animals just to get more money for snacks and food in general if you ever get low, but usually the owners will pay good money for the horses alone, so I was still making it work without that necessity. This scenario still somehow took about as long as the previous one though, despite the easier goal, since only the horses will count and you can only hold a max of 2 of them at a time. In fact, I started save scumming a few times just in the interest of trying to get a horse owner to arrive sooner, which did actually work in a few instances. After 13 days of horsing around, I did finally complete the scenario, and I was actually surprised by this since there was one horse that was just below the 75 health threshold of the horses I took care of, since it, of course, didn't get hungry enough to eat during the last few hours of it being in my care. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm happy that the game threw me some leniency here. But still, it's just not very comforting to have literally zero indication of your progress until the very end. Sure, it didn't matter in this scenario since there was no time limit, but in ones that do, I would be furious if I had to redo an entire scenario like this after working so hard to complete it. Just being real and honest here. Okay, let's finally move on to the final scenario, and this one, as you might expect, is a bit of a comprehensive test on all that we've done and taken care of so far. Basically, this time we're taking care of animals who are part of a performing circus troupe, and they're going to be staying with us for a period of 12 days. During this time, not only do we need to take care of these animals, which consist of 2 rabbits, 2 birds, 1 horse, and 1 dog, but we also need to make sure that the animals stay active during this time, and that they are capable of learning tricks and commands. This sounds like a lot, but remember, you're only being graded on these particular animals, and the game didn't even technically give a health score requirement either, so there might be more leniency here than you think. Now, as far as the animals staying physically fit and active, as well as learning tricks, well, while this may seem like this is coming completely out of left field, technically it's not. Remember, we've been playing on easy, which means half of these stats haven't even been in play for us. I imagine physical activity is tied to the movement stat, and although I'm not 100% sure about the tricks, we've technically been able to do or try them in every scenario thus far. I've just not really bothered with them because, again, not required for easy mode. Heck, who's to even say that I even need to pay attention to these requirements for this scenario either? For all I know, these conditions are just met by default on easy, and we just have to make it to the end. I just didn't feel like testing that theory, as you might imagine through some of the grief this game has put me in thus far. And I gotta say, I almost kinda wish the trick system was implemented a bit sooner, as it did honestly give me some satisfaction in watching the pets adapt to my training. Hell, the first time I saw the doggo perform the beg command, it honestly awoke something positive in me. Something I imagine a dog owner would feel when their pet follows a command properly for the first time. And it was kinda nice, not gonna lie. Now, that's only a fraction of credit I'm giving this game. As I said, where was this 15 hours ago? Why am I only experiencing this now? I think it truly shows that this game had potential. It really did. But the lack of controlled structure, the incredibly slow pace, and the complete lack of giving any sort of indication of your progression until it's too late, or any sort of information on key aspects of gameplay, just really bring this game down and kill any sort of enjoyment you could get otherwise. I think instead of giving one generic and static goal for each scenario should have just been focused on one particular animal. And in that scenario, it gives you a list of objectives you can fulfill, each one focusing on a different aspect of that animal and their gameplay. One could be meeting the top level of care with that animal or a number of those animals. One could be obtaining all the luxury items and upgrades, just so you could see all the tools you get to work with. One could be teaching certain tricks and skills to the animal, and the last could be some kind of minigame you could play with that animal and try to get a certain score or something. And yes, this game does have minigames. Don't get excited though, it's only one minigame that you can only do with the horses, and it's incredibly simple and not really worth it, especially for how long it takes. You're just jumping over obstacles with the horse for about a minute or two of time, and it takes a really long time to get through this. Definitely needed to be fleshed out a bit more and shortened by like half the time at least. Still though, my point stands that this did have some potential and could have made things a little more interesting for some of the other animals. So yeah, I started taking care of the pets and had a pretty nice system down where I basically did one giant cycle of going through all the motions with each animal, essentially twice a day. Once when the day started and the other close to the end. I only did the minigame once a day though because, yeah, way too long. But I think I had a pretty good repetitious routine going. Which means... Actually, no, this boring game doesn't deserve a fun Mario Party music montage. Moving on. I still had to take care of other animals outside the circus performers though, but I obviously paid a little less attention to them, really only focusing on taking care of their hunger and hygiene when necessary. Then, around day 7, something interesting happened. The owners of the circus came by and took the animals back. And of course, since this game tells you literally nothing, I had no idea if I succeeded or failed in my objective. It just treated them like they were just ordinary visitors, and more than that, the game continued. Now, the scenario description did say this was a 12-day scenario, so I waited through day 12, taking care of my other animal visitors as they came by, and then doing one more day since apparently it's always +1 days, and after day 13, I finally got the information that the scenario was over, which meant it was judgment time. I waited on the screen for a while to build suspense, and then proceeded to press the A button to find out... This could be a... Hold on. It's not GG until we see the evaluation. 3, 2, 1, and... It's over! It's over. Oh, thank God. I had beaten the scenario and completed Paws and Claws Pet Resort. Game complete, and thank God. And what's our reward for beating this game? Just a simple you win image, and back to the title screen you go. Pretty lame, right? I guess there is some novelty to seeing this screen though, as this is a screen you'll never see in the American version of the game. But still, I'd say the greater reward is never having to play this frickin' game again. Now, there was one other option on the main menu that seemed interesting to check out before we stopped playing. However, it's literally just the horse minigame from the main playthrough, so nothing special. I don't think you even get anything from this either, so literally you can avoid this option and pretend like it never existed. Although, something incredibly weird happened when I decided to take on one last stroll before ending this nightmare. We just do... practice course... What? 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 What is this? Oh my god. I'm riding like a... I'm riding two horses. Probably the best way this game could have ended, honestly. But yeah, that was my adventure in beating Paws and Claws Pet Resort. For enjoyability, this earns a 5 out of 5. If I'd been heavily drinking during the course of this playthrough. No, it's a 1 out of 5 easily, no contest, and this could easily be the worst game of the entire system. And I'm not joking when I say that. Listen, I'm not exactly a fan, nor am I really interested in pet care simulators in the first place. However, games like Nintendogs and The Sims pet games, sure, I can at least see the appeal of them, and they seem like they have at least some redeeming qualities. This game does not. It's boring, it's repetitive, it's super slow paced, it doesn't even look that good, it plays the same damn song over and over again, which is probably not even that bad of a song, but imagine trying to listen to it for 20 hours straight. Not even most extended OST videos on YouTube are that long. And the worst part is, the game gives very little indication of how things work or if you are doing anything right until it's already too late. And it's absolutely buggy as hell too, to the point where the freaking American version of the game can't even be completed. This game was an absolute travesty, and any enjoyment I got from it, well, let's just say it came from the streams of this and the memes that were formed along the way. Major shoutouts to longtime viewer of my channel, Mars Rover, for sticking with me through so much of this nightmare, and making jokes that really helped me get through this. And trust me, there were quite a few, usually bits that mocked the graphical glitches that were taking place. Stuff like Moritz the Rabbit summoning dark mode to my HUD layout, Rambo the Rabbit completely freezing in place for an entire day, until I saved and reloaded my file, the mysterious dark ooze which formed on screen from time to time, and the female customer that from the back looks like she isn't wearing any pants whatsoever. Seriously, who wears pants the same color of your skin anyway? And even with all of those moments of hilarity, it just could not save this game from being an absolute train wreck. You know what? No, this game is not even a train wreck, as at least that would be interesting and engaging to look at. This was an absolute bore fest, which kudos to my good friend Lady Bowser for coming up with that nickname. That's seriously what this was, and I got no enjoyment out of playing this. For difficulty, I landed on a 2.5 out of 5. It honestly wasn't that hard of a game once you knew the process and the fact that this game is actually kind of lenient on a lot of the requirements, but still, just the fact that so much isn't spelled out for you enough, and the hunger stat generally works more on luck than anything else, doesn't quite give it the same 1 status as something like Blades of Thunder or Nicktoons Unite. Not to mention, it's just generally difficult to stay awake playing this game, so that's kind of a challenge within itself. Well, I think it's time we close the doors on this resort and move on to something else. Unfortunately, this is not the only Paws and Claws game that we have to play for this series. No. There's 2 other games of this franchise, and probably a bunch of other mediocre pet care simulators too, so we're far from out of the woods yet. It does seem universally agreed upon, though, from the other GBA challengers, that this is the worst one of the bunch. So, at this point, I'm curious to see if anything will ever top it as, quite honestly, the worst Game Boy Advance game I've ever played. Thanks for watching, everyone, and here's a sneak peek of what we'll be playing next for this challenge. No matter what, it's going to be better than this borefest, that's for sure. Okay guys, thank you for watching this summary. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to leave a comment and or like on the video, as those will really help me in these videos out. And stay tuned for future summaries of this series. If you also want to watch full playthroughs of these games for this challenge, check out the video description for a full playlist of everything that's been uploaded and exported so far. And if you're curious about what I'm playing right now for the challenge, be sure to stop by my Twitch channel to see what my current progress is. Just be warned, I'll be a lot further ahead of where we are for these summaries, so keep that in mind. This has been SlimKirby in the GBA series, and I'll talk to you fine people next time. Later, folks.